Welcome to The Chimera, a role-playing adventure podcast. This week, we're taking a look back at our first season, talking about what worked, what didn't, and how we're thinking about changing things up going forward. I'm going to skip the regular formalities, since you should probably know most of the deal by now. If you're new to the show, for the love of God, start with a different episode, because this will just be spoiler-filled nonsense otherwise. The rest of you, let's go.
Okay, so our purpose today is to basically kind of try to do a little bit of a post-mortem and just kind of like, informal, like out-of-character epilogue for our first season, kind of talk about like what worked, what didn't work, any thoughts that we had, anything that we want to make sure that we take into account going into future seasons, any unanswered questions, anything like that. So if anybody has anything pressing that they want to start with there, otherwise I can kind of target us at some specific areas.
Yeah, I think target us.
Yeah, target us.
That seems like a good start.
Sure.
Okay, so I kind of have a couple things that I put down that I thought we should kind of talk about. The first one is really just kind of the big picture. Like, do we feel like this was a success? Like, given kind of what we tried to do and like what we were expecting from the start, do we feel like we kind of got in the territory we were looking for?
I think we got the feel that we were going for. If we were going for sort of a motley crew in space, has many adventurous antics with potentially questionable morals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I felt like thematically, I think that was our strongest. Like, I don't know, like the whole thing felt really gelled together. It was a pretty consistent tone throughout each of the episodes. It worked, I think, narratively extremely well.
Mm-hmm. And so there's actually, sort of go into that for a second. One of my kind of tone concerns was a little bit on that, because I know, like, in terms of kind of what I was preparing, there was kind of this big range from like space heist stuff to adventure-y stuff to kind of like stuff that borders on the edge of kind of like sci-fi horror,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now I guess the thing is that all this stuff is very much in the source material. If you read the Claremont X-Men run, like there are whole arcs that hit each one of those very clearly. So I guess it's all kind of within that umbrella. But I was a little worried that it would kind of veer too far to one side for that. So if that kind of gelled together, I'm happy to hear that.
I think it did. I think the mixture of kind of story types was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. I think the standouts for me were everything that involved kind of visual set pieces and the setting as a character. I thought worked very well. There were a lot of really interesting ideas woven into that. I think the cases where we had like any named characters we were interacting with, I think really hit out of the park. From the antagonists to allies, just all the named sort of, odd figures in this universe really worked. And there were a lot of good playing off of. This might be more focused in kind of the horror end you were talking about, like the space horror end. I think that there was a little bit of... There were times when that felt a little bit bogged down, mostly because we didn't have, we didn't have characters we were interacting with. We had, like, problems or monsters, but they tended to be less gripping because they lacked personality, right?
Right.
Yeah. Also, I think we're sort of weirdly weighted for dealing with that kind of situation, where like a couple of us can just maul their way through it and not have to worry. So, and I think this might be also something we can sort of course correct a bit in restatting everything for when we come back around.
That's a good point, actually, that I didn't think about, because on top of like the external source material, the Guardians movies and the X-Men comics and all this kind of stuff, certainly like there's a lot of kind of historical influence from like our old superhero game, right? Mm-hmm. But I think in there we were always working with a much flatter kind of power level in certain ways, or at least a power level more cohered to certain types of conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not necessarily that we didn't have people who were more powerful, but like in each of the kind of sub-campaigns that we did, we tended to have kind of a concept of what flavor of threats we were dealing with, and we tended to align around that, you know, like in the fifth column, which was the, you know, the like more spy secret like type game, like we had a lot more people who were fragile, I feel like, and a lot fewer people who were like Superman strong and could, you know, just kind of take infinite physical punishment. So in each of those cases, I think that probably aligned a little bit more. We're the opposite here. You know, we have Theron on the one side and we have Molly on the other. Both of you have areas that you're like extremely talented in, but like the threats that I think it's hard to put up a threat, certainly as you're stabbed right now, that is threatening but not deadly to both of you at the same time.
I think it's completely impossible. I mean, we saw that in
once
the
you
last...
get scale involved there, man.
Right.
Although
Actually,
I think the situation where that worked specifically for those two was recovering the cathedral artifact, where you were in a very hostile environment that was weird.
Yes, it's worked better. This ties to the thing that Kelly was saying about the environment as a character, and also I think one of the kind of proactive things. Like the more that you guys are in a scenario where you're proactively moving into an area or trying to capture something, you know, kind of that tilting in that heisty direction. It's a lot easier to work around that, because even if you have completely different weaknesses, for one, the party splits a lot, and we're in kind of an environment where we can do that without completely bogging things down. And two, you know, then it's a little bit easier to have things that each of you are dealing with that are relevant to your specific power set. So like if Theron is like taking out the guards in one spot and Molly is like sneaking around in the computer system or something, like I can have something that gets in the way of your goals in each of those cases, and it doesn't matter that only one of you is really set to it.
Yeah, I think another sort of like kind of problematic aspect was that when we were dealing with a lot of the sort of remote weirdness, we were very isolated from anything else. So like when we were on Alway or when we are on Malice, there weren't opportunities for us to do like interactions with regular civilization, because those things were completely removed.
That makes sense.
Like, I was sort of thinking about this earlier. We had sort of two almost sort of themes that I think we hit very separately, which is like we've got this sort of theme about a universe that's very old and full of mythology and buried things and strange stuff. And then on the other hand, we have this universe that's very like lively and cosmopolitan and diverse. And we tended to deal with those two very separately. And like, I mean, particularly for me, that was sort of an issue because I built a character very much for dealing with one and not the other. Which is also probably something that I'll be thinking about a little more when we get into restatting. But
and a little bit, I do feel like that tension is kind of built into the setting design, right? Like the reason that I kind of took the stories that we did in that direction is because we kind of established this thing with, you know, this where everybody's kind of getting around. Like, and this kind of goes back even just to the title, right? Like the old bones. At the same time, it's this really old, weird thing that nobody understands, that nobody has like a clear picture of, and then at the same time, you know, it's connecting together this huge number of different civilizations that are all interacting right now and are all kind of, you know, feel like they're kind of in their prime, you know.
Yeah, and it's also like I think like it's hard to find secret things in Civilization, right? It's hard to pull it off. It almost like secret things need to be somewhere where they couldn't have been discovered otherwise. So I mean, to an extent, like that tension kind of makes sense.
Well, I think that Alway and Malice are basically dungeons, right?
Right.
And the rest of the universe is like the tavern experience. I mean, literally the tavern experience sometimes, right? And so that dichotomy is there in a lot of different role-playing scenarios, and I don't think it's always a problem. I think the biggest problem is different character designs are better lent to different of the things. So some of that in the restatting, I don't know about you. I haven't been spending any of my experience. So,
I haven't either.
I
I have a list of things that I like have reserved it for. But since they sort of haven't come up, I haven't spent anything on it.
Yeah.
So I think some reconfiguring. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say it might be kind of fun and interesting to kind of sit down, especially because nobody's been doing that, to kind of everybody kind of talk about what their kind of big picture plans on that is, and then everybody spend it, as part of like either the restatting or just on top of what we have, just as a way to kind of like then we can kind of tie it into the season, I guess.
Yeah.
And either things can narratively spring from, oh, this was a problem area, or like this is something that we succeeded at, or whatever.
I feel like. Think, oh, go ahead.
Just that I was going to point out that the cathedral heist, which a lot of things went right in that, and so some things I want to highlight. It actually combines those two themes, right? Because it's about old stuff in the context of the cosmopolitan universe.
Yeah.
Two. Putting the two far ends of the durability spectrum together, where Molly and Theron were working together, I think really upped the tension. I would describe this game as fairly low tension for the most part, both because of kind of a sarcastic attitude, but also because, especially, I mean, this is like, I'm probably the chief person responsible for this because I built such an indestructible character, but there's not a lot of threat, right? There's not a lot of immediate danger. But putting the two, like the most durable and the least durable character together, meant that there was a general sense of like, oh, I gotta keep Molly safe. Like I'm nervous about her well-being, even if I'm not nervous about my character's well-being.
And that threat thing is something I kind of recognize as certainly a habit that I'm kind of used to falling into, both because I guess like really narrow focused like combat threat is definitely not like one of my most strong suits, but also I'm so used to, the last game that I ran before this was 8 years of ultra super high powerful Exalted, so like I did things to like occasionally kind of pretend that there was a physical threat there, but that was never really a thing, so it wound up being much more about like psychological drama and like people getting mad at each other in terms of driving the conflict in the game, right? Like most of the conflict was people disagreeing with each other and getting pissed off and going and getting reborn into a new person because they can't deal with their emotional problems. Yeah. So that kind of thing.
And Josh, I think both of us, are pretty much the type of GM that isn't really interested in killing off characters, right? Like that's not something we're not out there to collect scalps, and so. Given that that's so much of this group's collective experience is either you or myself as a GM, we're just not. We don't go in expecting to like, oh yeah, my head could be blown off at any moment. Like that's not really.
Yeah. Out of the three people who kind of like define the GMing for this group, Ian is the most bloodthirsty, and he's not really that bloodthirsty in the global scheme of things. So
yeah, a couple thoughts that just popped into my head. One. Since I'm thinking of it, it might be interesting in the restatting if, like, for Theron, if you were to make some of his, like, more high-end Emperos shielding and such, like, a little bit resource-dependent. Either in having to spend things or in accumulating, like, a negative resource the more you have to rely on him.
Yeah, I think in general, getting us into a position of more resource expenditure would be good.
Yeah,
because just that makes people have to make decisions, and it means that dragging stuff out has an innate cost to it, which is good.
On that note, I don't think we ever once spent momentum.
No,
that's true. Yep. I kept looking for opportunities.
I believe I gained a point once and I spent a point once.
Okay.
Yeah,
but it was just to use a dice.
And I want to both review like what we had for that, and then like what now that the initial Trinity core is out, like what they wound up going with for that. The big suspicion that I have from kind of looking at that is that it kind of wants you to be failing rolls a lot more than I think we're certainly used to. And I want to kind of get a sense of how they work that in Trinity, because it's like it's not a genre where I think you're usually expecting characters to be dealing with situations that they're completely not competent or even that risky in terms of their competence level.
Well, I mean, that's always been a problem with the storyteller system in general. Like it's generally pretty hard to fail unless your human level, right? And even then, it's pretty generous.
Although,
So, no, go for it.
that brings up another thing that I thought is like a very interesting data point, is that one of our tensest moments was when Roleth had to enter some buttons on a keyboard.
Yeah.
Yes, that was awesome.
Like,
Yeah, I was
That
going to
was a
say,
fun
like,
moment.
that might be a place where you, as the GM, might need to enforce even you could roll this or you could roll that, but go ahead and make a ruling on go ahead and roll this. It doesn't matter if that's the thing you're best at.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And I think rolling dice in general didn't happen as much as I was expecting, I guess, at least with my experience with the Vanguard game.
Yeah, and I think this has been true for 20 years, is that Kelly tends to have us roll dice more than I do. I think that's always been true.
Yeah. There were definitely a few situations where I felt like a little dice rolling might have actually been beneficial, not just for like tension increase, but also like for giving us sort of options, like particularly in things like research or manipulation. There were some spots where I was like looking back, I was like, oh, if I had to roll for that, I would have had to sort of pick like the questions that I would ask.
Mm-hmm. That said, the flashbacks that were like purely improv were really kind of fun and refreshing.
Yeah.
With no dice rolling almost at all, I think, right?
Yeah, I don't think we did any for
pretty
those.
close too.
Yeah, they were pure narrative, really.
It helped that they had very nicely very nicely defined and limited kind of scenario structures.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of kept them pretty well bounded. But also, it's good to know that everybody has been like through enough of this kind of like timey-wimey nonsense in like past games that like, I've certainly played with people where I would never try to do something like this because they just want to fuck with it, right? They want to like see if they can break the timeline or like get weird stuff into it that doesn't really fit.
No idea who you're talking about, Josh.
I think the biggest reason that 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 stuff works is that everybody really does kind of play it in like as a jam, the number one thing that everybody's kind of invested in those scenarios is figuring out how the stuff that they do can riff off of what everybody else is doing, and what'll make that the funniest and what'll make that the most exciting. And
cool too. Oh, go for it, Molly.
I think we as a group are pretty good at collaborative storytelling and kind of, keeping one eye on what our character wants, but keeping one eye on what makes the best story as well, which has been something that I've just really enjoyed about our group and about the games we've been playing.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, as a player in those flashbacks, like, that was the coolest thing, was trying to figure out, like, how does this all fit together, right? Like, that was the payoff for those sessions.
Yeah.
And I thought they came, I was surprised. I was genuinely surprised, in, I think, every single one of those flashbacks, which was cool.
Yeah. Also, I just wanted to say, like, you were really good in those, Jeff. Like, there were a lot of points where I was like,
yes.
Did Jeff get a lot of prep time for this? Because this shit is coming out like complete.
It was fun.
No, the and I don't remember which of those we did first now at this point, but definitely
Molly.
after the first one. Oh yeah. And definitely after that, I kind of took the brakes off a little bit, because with that one I was like, oh, like we have to make sure this all works, and like, is this going to be a huge trade wreck or whatever? And then like it came together like so cleanly at the end that I was just like, we could just do this. I could just toss shit at people and it'll be fine, and I think it was all fine.
Yeah.
So that worked out well. And certainly, the challenge is kind of an area, and the dice rolling. And I know that we've kind of talked before that definitely one of the areas that I want to kind of try to work on in the future is just kind of brisk pacing, especially in some of these kind of like intro scenario type things. Like that I know has been a thing that's come up, is we've got this big new complicated scenario or place or whatever to engage with, and there's a point after which there's enough information and kind of momentum of what's going on that we can just kind of carry that forward. But up until then, it's kind of like, and I definitely should be kind of cutting more aggressively and kind of pushing stuff around to make that move faster.
Yeah, I think that's just like a consequence of the 2-hour limit that we have. Because normally, like, it'd be cool, right? If we're playing for, say, for 8 hours or whatever, that, you know, we spend that time kind of figuring stuff out. But when we are kind of constrained by that time.
Well,
box,
but I mean, we're also a podcast, so I don't, you know, people are listening. They maybe don't want to listen to us, like, figuring out one question for 8 hours.
Yeah, totally.
It's just the format that has like had the least that like is the least forgiving of that, and I think that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, when we were doing 8-hour marathons, like we would, you know, that would kind of just cover for the time that we're eating the pizza, basically.
Right.
And when I was running text-based like chat games, it was a lot. There was a lot kind of less issue, kind of with like ebb and flow in terms of that. Whereas here, like we really want to be able to kind of keep things taut right away. So that's definitely one of the things I'm going to try to keep working on.
So one of the things that I've been sort of thinking about that plays into, I think, a few of the things that we just talked about, is that I think we all sort of ended up a little like individually undermotivated, and maybe a little too deferential in terms of like on ship authority. Like there's for a lot of us, I think a lot of the time our motivation was taking orders, which is, you know, can be handy, but is not necessarily the most narratively compelling situation. And I think that's not necessarily something to address right now, but something to think about going forward.
I definitely had some of the scenarios that are kind of most cut against that, like, you know, like the Chimera getting stolen at the end of the season, like you know, like Jeff getting served papers for the trial, all that kind of stuff. I definitely had a lot of that on kind of a slow burn, so it didn't really get to drive the action that much in the arcs that we did, and that makes sense as a point of issue there.
Something I was sort of thinking about in like as a way to sort of work with that is that, like, I know that a lot of systems these days have like a structured downtime between adventures. Like if you look at Blades in the Dark, there's a lot of avenues for people sort of together but individually to think about like actual structural character goals, like starting projects or working out issues, that kind of stuff, that I think it might be interesting for us to adopt either like with a genuine rule structure or just sort of casually the way they do it on the Adventure Zone, where they'd have their lunar interludes where they'd just be kicking around their space base doing stuff.
To sort of gamify drama to some extent. Yeah.
Yeah, that works pretty well for them. And then, you know, kind of, you know, otherwise in Friends at the Table, the season where they start doing the like 2-tier game, like there's a lot of issues with how that plays out, but having something that's kind of, you know, looking at pulled out like perspective, like punctuating the regular stuff, I think was beneficial. Yeah. I wouldn't want to do something like of the same type as that, but like the benefit you get from having something that is at a different perspective occasionally is, I think, pretty clear.
But also just like in a situation where like after an adventure we have like an episode that's sort of in that space but not structured, where we're dealing with some of the things that we have left over. Like I think it would have been interesting if, like, say Jeff had to roll some dice to figure out how much he was going to be able to manipulate Captain Pycron into working for us. I think that would have sort of branched that into something that we would pull back in a bit more. Or like, you know, Molly would have to work on a science project based on like a thing we picked up.
Yeah, the challenge with that is always just finding enough to kind of keep it entertaining with everybody. You know, again, in like the text game, like I would literally just do that with the people who were affected, and it would kind of have that effect of kind of mediating what was going on in the main arcs without kind of having to draw everybody in, and that's a little bit more difficult in this format.
Yeah, I started trying to inject a little bit of drama to mix things up with, like suggesting like Dang and Theron butting heads a little bit. But and the Emporos taking over could have been a time that I could have amped that up a little bit, but I wasn't sure I wanted to because we're in a tense situation and I like everybody here. Yeah. I don't want to seem like I'm punishing anybody for playing their character.
We're definitely in a little bit more of a next gen kind of situation there than like a DS9 one. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. We have the bones of some some good intra-party tension, right? Like just in terms of authority, we have two kind of people who really want to follow the chain of command, right? Theron and Dang really want Molly to be in charge. And then we have two people who I think kind of want to do their own thing for the most part. And then also Molly doesn't exactly want to be in charge. Like she's not against it, but she's not like actively seeking. She's not like constantly giving out orders or anything. So there's a lot of potential in that. I think some degree it just hasn't had a chance to play out. I think also some of the points of tension, hinge on things that may not be possible to do. Like there's a lot of potential tension in terms of Theron's loyalty to the group versus loyalty to Emporos, but that's a big because Josh has to be responsible for playing Emporos. Like that's a heavy lift to ask Josh to like be responsible for this whole side of one person's character. There's a limit to how much energy. But
I think there's this whole other element of Theron's backstory that we haven't had a chance to explore much, which is his relationship to the other Aleroy.
Oh yeah.
And so I think just putting him.
I don't want to play that. Oh my god, we will all die,
folks. Aleroy are scary.
Yeah.
Well, most of the Aleroy aren't Theron, right? Most of them are not carrying around a McCoy in them. So those are like probably a threat that the rest of the party can deal with.
Right. I mean, but I think every character has something that they value that they might say, like, what would I do if I had to weigh, like, pulling for the crew or pulling for this thing?
Yeah.
And I just don't think that those things ever came up in a way that they ever were at like cross points with one another.
Right.
So like if we were focusing on something that Molly was interested in, it was really a story just about what Molly was interested in. No one really had any reason to not want to support her, so they did. Or, if Emperos was leading Theron somewhere, similar thing, we were going somewhere strange, but it was kind of like, why not? So I think maybe if there was a way to introduce but if we do this, then something of value to a couple other people might be lost.
That I'll definitely have to think about a little bit more, because again, I think that does emanate a little bit from the character design.
Yeah.
Sure.
In the Exalted game that I ran last, it would have been difficult to not have people be at cross purposes over literally anything that happened.
Yeah.
Because Kelly tried to play the most diplomatic character in that game, and he was still weird stuff coming up all the time.
Yeah.
Here everybody to some degree has a little bit of relaxation around.
Yeah.
Well, everybody is an outsider, sort of and the Chimera is kind of what brings all these outsiders together, right?
Yeah.
Right. Whereas Exalted, everybody's power source is diametrically opposed to any other power source.
Right.
And even within those, there are factions.
You look at even some of the source material here, and Guardians of the Galaxy 2 has to basically just invent a whole bunch of completely random bullshit to even get the party conflict dynamic that they want going again.
Right.
It is difficult. Yeah. There's kind of a core challenge there. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you're doing space travel, it's a big universe, and most of the things in the universe don't really give a shit about all the other things in the universe. You don't have those kind of, I think what you guys were saying, that in Exalted, everyone's in clans and everyone knows all the other clans and there's all this history, and so you make a character from here and you automatically have a group of people that you don't like or you want to like you more or whatever, and if everyone's from different places that don't really interact with one another, then you have to find reasons for conflict. You have to try a little bit harder.
And to be clear, not that I'm looking for this huge amount of intra-party conflict. To a certain degree, having that mostly be low key is something that I'm actually pretty happy with.
Yeah, I don't think we need to turn it up to 10. I think we need to turn it up to 4.
Yeah, I think it matches our play style too. I mean, again, talking about the previous game Josh is alluding to here, different personalities around the table in that game. Like, we're just more interested in intra-party conflict. Like they're like out there, they're here for that. I don't think that's as much our collective style. But I think that the characters we made do actually want some of that. So making the space for the amount that actually is, I think, natural to the characters, I think would be good.
Also, historically speaking, I always generate conflict with Josh when he's another player.
I'm kind of looking forward to seeing how that plays out.
Yeah, especially because for season 2, not in order to remedy this, but as something that will, I just made a character who's actively an asshole.
You actually went. I don't want to spend too much time about season 2 here, but you went a little bit more off book than I was expecting with your character, Vin. I mean, not in every way, but like in a couple ways.
I want to hear more about that. Maybe not now, but I'm
later.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was going to say that the one other thing that and this definitely has kind of the old people who are sitting around at home and settled down kind of thing to it. But most of the games that I've been in that had a lot of intra-party conflict before, at least 60% of that was people sublimating their weird, like in real life, like psychosexual conflicts with each other into the game.
Gee, I have no idea what Josh is talking about in this instance.
You actually don't, because I'm thinking of this Apocalypse World game that I was in, which
man.
oh my god, like you can't even describe it.
Yours, I do have to take a moment to shout out the L5R game that Kelly and Josh and I played in college.
Oh god, I wasn't even thinking of that.
Alex.
Jesus Christ.
Wow.
Because that worked really fucking well, even when it got very intense.
Right, that was characters, like intra-party conflict where people are actively trying to murder each other.
Yeah. And Alex did a great job with that.
That's kind of the level that this Apocalypse World game was on. And it was also, there was a similar amount of kind of weird, multi-person, sublimated psychosexual, conflict again. But the difference was in this Apocalypse World game, I did not have any of that with anybody. So my character wound up basically winning everything. I wound up in charge, and I got all the stuff that I wanted, and everybody else wound up completely wrecked. Yeah. So that worked out really well
with L5R,
for me personally.
We all sort of traded fucking each other over in a really reasonable fashion.
Yeah, so the other thing that kind of hit one of the other points that I wanted to kind of go into, which was the party dynamic. So the last kind of big thing I wanted to kind of talk about was how we kind of feel like the setting played out, both in terms of as a place and stuff to interact with, and then also in terms of that element of mystery and discovery.
I feel like our ratios were a bit off. I liked all the stuff that was there, but I feel like we spent a lot of time just in terms of hours on, again, that stuff that was sort of remote. Mm-hmm. And we lost some of but we didn't get into necessarily a lot of the galactic world building components.
Right. And I think we all kind of collectively agree that The Last Resort was the most successful out of everything that we did.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would have just liked to have some more opportunities to fight in space. Because we kind of just used the Chimera to go from one place to another, but we didn't really use it otherwise. And it would have been cool to because there's opportunities party wise, because we all kind of do different things on the ship to kind of bring that together and kind of help amplify the Chimera's weirdness and keep it kind of front and center as a character.
Yeah, I would have. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I didn't think of that as a chance to do that kind of thing that we're talking about with people in kind of separate roles, but it makes sense.
Is the big bad for next season of The Old Bones going to be the Chimera?
God, no, I need the Chimera. Bro, let this fuck without.
We all need the Chimera.
Oh God, yeah. I was just thinking of something.
Kacey, I think you had something.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, for obvious character reasons, I would have definitely liked to have seen the Chimera as character a little bit more, although that's, that's putting it, again, sort of putting it onto you.
that's definitely just real quick. That's definitely an area that I have to kind of think about my kind of approach to, because there's kind of like 3 virtual characters basically within the party that I have some level of responsibility for, and I tried to bring those up in moments where they were hyper relevant, but I definitely did not kind of get them to the level of kind of passive relevance that I think optimally we would want them to be. So that's something I need to like figure out if there's like, a secondary approach I can take or a trick or something I can do to improve on that.
Josh, do you need to go back and read the Wraith playbook?
Oh God.
I probably do.
I was thinking about that. So there's the Wraith solution, which for anyone who doesn't remember, you have a shadow in Wraith and another player usually plays your shadow. And so like there's somebody else who's driving the somebody that's sort of working against you. It's very explicitly against you in Wraith.
Yeah,
that might be one option.
And they have abilities.
Yeah. There's mechanical stuff, and there's a reason why there's somebody else in charge of it. That's one option. Another option I was thinking of specifically for Theron, but it might also work for Ralith, is something like the limit or paradox system in Exalted, where there's like there are conditions under which you're sort of accruing problems as a result of kind of using your powers or just the normal function of your character's life. And those problems aren't necessarily like constantly debilitating, but they do complicate things. It might be a way to help structure something that contributes to the narrative, but doesn't require Josh to intervene or even anybody else to intervene, and supply the characterization of this sort of pseudo character that we have embedded in our own concepts.
What I like about that actually just a couple things, because it's also kind of a passive generator of conflict that isn't too aggressive, but that but the thing, like, because again, like most of the games that I've run in White Wolf type systems before have had some system like that, and a lot of the time the benefit of that was less even like whatever the actual mechanical outcome, like bad outcome was. Like in Exalted, we did like limit checks and stuff all the time, but we almost never like tracked stuff to the point where we're like, oh, okay, this system now dictates that you have to have a limit break and kind of like freak out in a specific way. But the mechanical note of kind of having to catch like, oh, this thing happened, that means that you have to risk a point of this, that gave a narrative, like the most beneficial thing was having the narrative opportunity to butt in and do something about it each time that comes up. Like that's kind of a way that's beneficial. If you have something like that, and it's like, oh, okay, this thing happened. This thing is something that's relevant to this other character or to the mental state or whatever. Like that's a good prompt to introduce a small piece of characterization or have the other character do something, and a little bit goes a long way in that context because it's something that's fraught, that's something that has like some emotional resonance to it.
You could kind of do the inverse where you accumulate glory to use in the next fight by being a shitty person beforehand.
I mean, I would totally do that. A lot of the White Wolf games have something like this, and frankly, I think that most of them aren't any good because I feel like they over-determine your character's behavior in a way that gets in the way of actual role-playing. It's just like it overly systematizes things. But there are some, I think that some of the most recent complicated versions of this, and I'm thinking especially of Paradox for Sidereal Exalted.
God, I love it.
Really lends a lot of interesting role-playing opportunities to thinking about how am I going to manage this problem for myself. I don't want to basically taint out. I don't want to cause like a major problem. So I'm going to accept a bunch of lower grade issues to avoid a big problem in the future.
It winds up being like spoon theory, but for like characterization.
Yeah, no, very similar.
It's like it's saying I'm really good at all this stuff, but I have this kind of fundamental limiting factor in place that will keep me from doing everything that I want if I just ignore it. So how am I going to parcel this out so that everything works out?
I think the other challenge too with really the Chimera Union and Empros is that not only are they kind of autonomous entities, but the characters that created them don't really know what they are or what they want. So that also makes it kind of hard to be like, what would this guy do in this situation who's part of me but not me? I don't actually know, because we created this character to be like kind of, plot fodder to some degree, or like but I think that also makes it harder like it's harder, right, for Kelly, for you to figure out what Emperos would do because you don't actually know exactly what he is or what he wants.
Right. No, it's exactly right. Why I think something like sort of an angst bar, which is what I'm sort of thinking of here. It's just like you have to manage this relationship, and it causes a certain amount of trouble. And they're inscrutable, so you don't really know why it's causing trouble. You just know that, like, my angst bar got too high, and now I got this problem. Like that's the disadvantage is I don't understand this character that's a part of my character, and so I can't really play it fully. The advantage is I don't understand that my character doesn't understand this character as a part of my character, so it can behave in rational ways, and that's okay.
Sure.
Yep. And there's certainly a little bit of that where I do think with a system in place, one other thing that makes it a little bit easier to do there is to leverage that not knowing in a way that kind of gives the players a little bit of agency. Like there's a pretty wide range of things that, like, for example, like Kelly or Jeff can tell me, oh yeah, the Emperos or Moonin is doing this, and like I've got a pretty broad framework for what's going on with each of them. I've got a way that I can work that in and figure out what that means. But again, it's still a burden again if somebody's just trying to do that like randomly at off moments with some kind of system that helps guide that. Again, it can kind of be like, oh, if this happens, like give me something that like seems like cross purposes to what the main character is doing right now, and then I have the burden of figuring out what that means. But like we can kind of play to like what is going to be interestingly disruptive at the moment. That can be more of a guide point than like what truly would this character do at this point.
Maybe like Dang and Sidra could be more beholden to the like ebb and flow of elemental forces of energy and economics.
It would be pretty funny for Sidra to have like stat losses like when the market is just down.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, jeez.
Just not feeling it today.
Yeah. Really hungover.
This goddamn
Down,
recession.
dropped 3 points.
Today's been a real bear.
Seeing the price on a T-note, man.
Just at the end of at the beginning of every session, roll for market values.
Right.
Yeah, in the comic version of this, it could be like the Spawn like soul counter, except for instead of it's like
It's an actual
value.
stock ticker.
Oh, and that does kind of remind me one thing, and this is something that I feel like has mostly worked out pretty well, is I do feel like we've done a pretty good job of getting everybody's kind of shticks front and center. Like the fact that Sidra has this financial aspect has been like relevant and important, like repeatedly. The fact that Rowlath is a lawyer has come up and been plot like central. Like I do feel like all this stuff has to some degree or another like had the opportunity to show on the storyline, and I do think that's pretty good.
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job of that. Like, honestly, I've tried to do characters like this before, where it's like, oh, this would be this cool, weird, abstract thing to play with, and then it's too hard on the GM, or the GM doesn't quite like integrate it the way that I was expecting, or it just becomes this irrelevant part of my character. But like, it was really cool to actually like play as a lawyer, and it felt good.
Yeah, and it's given me. One thing that was good about the kind of setting design process that we did with this, like we kind of spent 9 months kind of slowly cohering this. And one thing that was good there is it kind of gave me the opportunity to really work out a lot of the stuff that I wanted to do in some kind of relationship to that. So like almost all of the like, kind of antagonistic forces and everything that I have in place have like some really tight fundamental connection to one or more of those. Like everybody that I have that like, and only so many of these, like Legion Stone and Galactic Collections, and then the Excess are really the only two that have had a lot of screen time in the season that we did. But like I have a few others that I'm hoping to roll out eventually, and they all kind of have that type of thing. They're all kind of driven by what's an element of one or more of the party members that will really put them at odds with this.
Don't forget Nasir Azil.
Don't forget Nasir Azil. Never forget Nasir Azil.
And so that's one thing that's nice, is that like literally all the evil plots that I have are specifically driven by a PC like relationship of one kind or another. So I'm not too, that's an area I'm not too worried about, of having villains that everybody is like eager to like kind of deal with, because they all are just people that you would already be pissed off at. For one reason or another.
Yeah, so I vote that Nasir Azil has to return to her home planet. Side note, Nasir Azil died on the way home to her home planet. But I was going to say, again, in terms of like thinking about a spectrum that the characters are on, I think it's fair to say that the character who has the most opportunities in dungeon space and the least opportunities in tavern space is Theron. And the character who has the least opportunities in dungeon space and the most opportunities in tavern space is Sidra. Mm-hmm. And yep. I'm sort of good with that for my character because that's sort of that's the way that I intended it to be to some degree. Like, he's supposed to have a limited functionality among other people because he's an exile, and that's kind of the deal. Like, he doesn't have connections, so it's hard for him to relate to other people. But that may not be something you want to accept, Vin, and I totally understand that. I think it's just something to address in the restatting. Like, think about, okay, so Sidra's been at this for a while, and she's probably noticed, like, when we go off the grid, it's hard I don't have much to contribute. Like, so then, like, figuring out what her part's going to be.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it isn't so much, like, the different capabilities as the fact that because we are both in situations where we're both there all the time, none of us are forced to have to compensate. Like, I would love to see Theron have to deal with social situations. I very much want to see that.
Yeah. We've done a little bit of that. It's mostly, I mean, part of it is that it's rare that we have a social situation where all five of us aren't on screen. Right?
That's what I mean.
So I'll occasionally interject something, but I'll just let the more verbose characters talk, mostly because it's hard to... I mean, here's the thing about combat. Combat has a turn order. Conversation doesn't. And so, it's just a matter of who speaks first. And I don't... Like, I'm not interested in stepping on the other players, especially if what I have to contribute is mostly like falling on my face.
Yeah, well, no, this is why I go back to the Rolith can't use button scenario, where like it's not that like he chose to step up and be the one to try and push buttons; it's that we were just in a position where he had to be the one to push a button.
Yep. And I think certainly one thing that it definitely seems like it would be useful to lean on more is like with the game session structure that we have, the group size that we have and everything, it does seem like a two-way split is pretty plausible and pretty functional when we've done that. Yep. And it seems like that's one of the best ways to do this because it means that we're always going to be able to put somebody in a situation that it would be optimal if they were in the other one. So that might just be something for me to lean on and for all of us to kind of jump to a little bit faster. It's like, can we split the party a little here? Can we have two different things that we're tackling? And maybe neither of these is perfectly optimal for the exact people who are doing it, but we've only got 5 people, so it's got to split up some way or another.
I think that might be the first time I've ever heard a GM say that.
We need to split the party more.
Well, it's nice because one, like there's just no conception that like anybody's doing anything secret here. If we're splitting the party, it's for tactical reasons. It's not because this person is going to go conspire against everybody else. But also, I don't know. It's felt pretty easy to kind of switch contexts on that with what we're doing. And I don't know if it's just because I'm used to using more people than 5, so like that feels light in comparison. But it's felt pretty straightforward to as long as it's down to just 2 scenarios, jumping back and forth between that. I feel like we've been able to do the pacing on that okay. We've been able to keep both of them kind of coherent. So
and it's totally in genre too. So
yeah.
Yeah, when you start out with like 7 is your default number, going down to 5 is like what problems?
Yeah, we kind of have the reverse Harrison Bergeron thing here a little bit, where we like took off all the weights. Cool. Okay. Well, that was my big picture stuff. I did want to one thing I was going to just kind of mention too that came out of this is that certainly in kind of my initial planning for the second season of this, one of the things I've definitely done is kind of try to have like one specific storyline oriented around each character to kind of hit some of the specific plot hooks and elements that we've talked about so far. So this conversation will be useful in kind of fleshing those out a little bit. Like it'll be a good opportunity to take some of the stuff that we talked about and make sure that that's reflected in there. And like especially like being able to say, okay, well, if this is the arc that's about this character, like what are some kind of fun like incongruous scenarios that we can create for the rest of the party by doing that. Like that. So that hopefully will be, something we can do with that. Like, I think, obviously, like one of the things that we know about that's pending is Raleth's trial. And I think we can imagine some of the hilarity that could potentially ensue from given that.
I'm really looking forward to that.
I can't wait to see what the format of the trial is.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
Cool. So, was there anything else that people specifically wanted to kind of try to cover?
I guess one thing I wanted to say was just the XP and the XP system in general. I don't know how much that's getting rejiggered with the new, now that we sort of have a full Onyx Path storyteller system. But I feel like, it's sort of like the beginning of Whose Line Is It Anyway? Where like, the stats are made up and the points don't matter a little bit. That, we kind of had an XP system that was actually pretty fun to implement just as far as like keeping goals in mind, but we kind of stopped doing that about halfway through. And even when you got XP, you were kind of like, I don't really know what to spend this on because my character is already pretty broke. So, so I think just kind of maybe trying to find a way to either say, look, maybe we kind of don't even need XP, or to find a way to make it like actually something that we want to collect and use.
So I think we lost the assigning, the assigning each other elements of what's the term? I don't know. We're using a term for that, but like the thing where we were giving each other things I want to see your character do. Goals, yeah. Where we're assigning goals, which I thought was fantastic. We lost it when we did the flashbacks because the flashbacks obviously weren't going to use that mechanism.
Oh yeah.
And then we didn't get back to it.
Yeah.
So there's a reason why we lost it. I would love to see us return to it. I sort of agree with you. The system, the rules are made up and the points don't matter, and that's fine. I actually think it would make sense in my mind is like you get a bunch of XP at the end of the season. And otherwise you don't really spend it in between episodes. And I think that personally, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree.
And Dang, I did make a concerted effort in the last episodes for Dang to get indigestion.
I saw that.
to meet one of my last
He did. That was awesome.
Yeah, and one thing that we should just revisit this and think about it. But it might be for stuff like the goals, it might be interesting to look at if we don't really feel like we're in a spot where people have a ton of advancement-y stuff that they want to do. It might be worth looking at some kind of like in-play resource that you can get by meeting goals, kind of sort of an action pointy or like momentum, if we're not getting it by failing, maybe we should get momentum by succeeding at goals. And then you have this thing that you can use if you're doing that. It's pretty precious because it doesn't come back at all on its own. So I think we should look at kit bashing something like that too. Because I do agree. I like doing the goals stuff. So having an actual meaningful thing attached to it would be good.
Yep. Agreed.
Maybe make an effort at earning momentum through failing at social interaction, so we have it to spend in the fight,
or vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other challenge with having a sort of a transient stat that was based on failure was there just wasn't a lot of failure.
That also is kind of what made the XP. Well, I mean, there was plenty of stuff I wanted to spend my XP on, but I didn't feel like I had a good moment to do it. Like, it felt weird for Moonin to suddenly have like missiles. Like it was, I don't know. It was a little bit weird because of how narrative it was. But then also,
there's no wrong moment for missiles.
The whole momentum thing was like, well, I'm not really using this stuff. Like it's not. I don't know if I want to spend points on this stuff. Like it was just a little bit weird.
Yeah. I mean, again, as Jeff said, White Wolf systems in general are not really. The people who design White Wolf systems think that it's easier to fail than it is. I think that's just generally true. The game designers, these games are terribly play tested, and they just assume basically a D&D level of, like an aggressive D&D level of failure, which is not the system that they usually put in the book. And then we're all generally pretty good at making characters, and Josh is not a cutthroat DM because that's not our style. I like that about Josh. So it just means that we don't have a lot of built-in failure for the game we're playing. I think that personally that's okay. I like that style. It just means we probably shouldn't have a core mechanic based off of failure.
Right.
Yep.
Yep.
Also makes sense for season 1 of an ongoing thing that this is all the stuff that we're good at, and then there's a turning point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
True. And it's not like, I mean, look, we didn't have a lot of mechanical failure, right? But a lot of bad stuff still happened to us.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's not like there's an absence of drama for that reason.
Hence ending the game on someone else's ship.
Right.
Yeah. Who failed that role? Come on.
Well, and I think too, I mean, for me personally, the things that get me really interested are the interpersonal dynamics, the pulling up of history of characters and sort of seeing like what happens when this thing that only this character knew about gets thrown out for the whole party to deal with. And, you know, like that's the meat of what interests me in playing. I'm fine if my character gets killed, but I don't feel like that's the tension that I'm looking for is like, am I going to live? It's like, what's going to happen? You know, if you fail, that failure should be part of the story, not part of like a botched dice roll. So I like that that's kind of what we do.
The stakes are emotion, not
My
HP.
favorite system for that is the Star Wars system. That is one of my favorite dice systems in the world.
Which Star Wars system? There's like 4 of them.
The more recent one.
Like the
Edge of Empire stuff.
Oh, I don't think I know that one.
You should check it out, man. It is the best dice system I've ever seen. It's cinematic. Like, when you fail, you can still radically succeed. When you radically succeed, you can still fail. Like, there's all these cool, like, it's like non-binary. So, like, you can fail really bad. You can succeed really bad. You can, like, triumph over everything, but then still fail your roll. Like, there's just all these cool, different ways that you can progress. It's all intended to be narrative. So, I don't know. It's a really fun system to check out.
Cool. Yeah, I'll take a look.
Yeah, basically the sort of essence of it is that scene where where they're on the Death Star and Han is talking to the guy on the microphone.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
But it really captures the like ebb and flow, and combat's really quick, and dice pools are reasonable. Like it's just a smart system.
Cool. Okay. Well, that about covers it from me.
Nice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Good talk, everybody.
Yeah. I think this was productive, and I will definitely be going back over this and taking some notes for next time.
And it was crazy fun, Josh.
It was
absolutely.
It was awesome.
Yeah, really fun.
Cool. Okay. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to when we get to start the other thing.
Yeah.
So Kelly, I started actually drawing up a character sheet, and then I realized I'm like super confused about a couple things.
Sure.
So I might have to hit you up about.
That's it this week and this season for the Chimera. Our theme music is Hoof, Heart, and Hiss by Matt Weber. Check out the show notes for a link to more of Matt's work. You can also find us online at thechimera.space or at ChimeraPod on Twitter or Facebook. And join us back here in 2 weeks for the start of a brand new campaign. Thanks for listening.